Now, let's put the camera back and look at the three ships themselves. The first is the Panama shipwreck found off Palawan and dating back to the mid to late 15th century. This was the Southeast Asian trading vessel. It carried just one handgun, HG-001. The second is the Lena shipwreck, located off Buswinga Island. It sank around 1490 and is described as a Chinese Southeast Asian hybrid junk, meaning the ship itself combined two different shipbuilding traditions. This one carries the most handguns with 5 pieces on board, HG-002, 003, 004, 005, and 007. The third is the Santa Cruz shipwreck, found off Zambales province, dating from the late 15th to early 16th century. It was a hybrid vessel from the South China Sea ship traditions. It carried HG-006. When we look at all three ships together, here is a real surprise about their stealth. These were not purely Chinese ships. The Lena show is what archaeologists call a Chinese Southeast Asian hybrid junk. Well, the Santa Cruz is classified as a hybrid of the South China Sea shipbuilding tradition. Only the Panama looks like a purely local Southeast Asian vessel. This range, from purely local to clearly mixed, shattered the old idea that Chinese and Southeast Asian shipbuilding were two completely separate worlds. In fact, the South China Sea already shared a common shipbuilding culture, bleeding Chinese watertight bulkhead height and flat bottoms with alternation and Malay techniques. If we look deeper, the locations of these rigs also give us a very important clue to understand what happened to the ships and their firearms. When we map out where they sank, a clear trade route emerges. The three shipwrecks in the Philippines, the Panama, the Lena Shoal, and the Santa Cruz, lie along a single north-south line down the western edge of the archipelago. This geography is not random. Each rig sits at a strategic point along the South China Sea, whether at a choke point, a natural harbor, or a narrow strait. Together, these three seas map out the span of Asia's most important pre-European trade route. Santa Cruz sits on the western coast of Luzon, facing the South China Sea, just north of Subic Bay and closer to the entrance of Manila Bay. In the 15th century, this stretch of coast was the natural southern end of the China to Luzon Sea lane. Ships sailing down from Fujian and Guangdong with the monsoon winds would hug the Luzon coast, and Santa Cruz was one of the first sheltered anchorages they would reach. It was also a perfect stepping stone to Manila Bay. A century later, when the Spanish arrived, the Manila Galleon route would follow almost exactly this same path. The Lena Shoal lands off Buswinga in the Caribbean Islands, the chain that sits between the South China Sea and the Sulu Sea at the northern tip of Palawan. Geographically, this was the crossroads of the entire region. Any ship coming from China and heading for the Sulu Sea towards the Sulu archipelago, Brunei, or Malaccas had to pass through these waters. The Lena Shoal vessel, which sank around 1490 with a cargo of 15th century Chinese porcelain, was almost certainly sailing that exact route. When Frank Goldier's team excavated the site in the 1990s, they recovered the thousands of sailing dome and blue and white porcelain pieces, clear proof of just how busy this coast road was. The Panama rig lands off the southern tip of Palawan, right at the Balabaga Strait. This is the southern gate of the South China Sea. The strait is narrow, shallow in places, and dotted with reefs, yet it is the only practical passage for deep draft ships moving between the South China Sea and the Sulu Sea, the Celebes Sea, and onto the Moluccas. In the 15th century, Pandaman Island was a regular stop on the route source to Brunei and the Spicy Islands. The rig itself dates to the mid to late 15th century, and it is one of the historical vessels carrying mixed cargo of Chinese and Southeast Asian ceramics at the southern end of this trade loop. Three main factors made these locations so important. First, the monsoon. Trade was tied to the winter and the summer winds, and these three seas were natural cooling points along that when the drive passed. Second, the choke points. The Balabac Strait and the Calamin passages were narrow and dangerous, but they were unavoidable. Every ship had to pass through them. Third, the Parent. The very same coves, reefs, and islands that sheltered merchant ships also had the pirates who hunted them. The later show, the Pandaman and the Santa Cruz were not just the trading stops. They were contested zones, and that is why the ships on them were armed. Speaking of pirates, it helps to understand a bit of this history. We often hear about Western pirates, but the stories of Eastern pirates are rarely told. In the 15th century, piracy in Philippine waters was not a single threat, but a patchwork of different groups, each with its own ships, bases, and messes. First was the Sulu raiders, Tosi and Samo sailors from the New Sulu Sultanate, founded around 1450, who built faster outrigger war canoes called Gari and Lano to attack shipping in the Sulu Sea. Second was the Bruneians, whose ruler, Sultan Bukia, commanded a navy powerful enough to sail across the South China Sea and briefly capture Manila itself in early 1500s. Third was the Maguindanao chiefs of the Cotabato Basin, who would later set up a sultanate of their own. Fourth was the Arano, a seafaring people of the Llano coast, whose slave raiding tradition would peak 2 centuries later, but whose root began in this period. And finally, there was the Chinese smuggler and the war coal, a label that, in this era, covered a mix of Chinese, Japanese, and Southeast Asian crews, pushed out by the Ming Coast Sea Band, who attacked the Chinese junks in the open sea. What all these groups shared was a flexible relationship with legitimate trade. A captain could be a merchant one season and a raider the next. The handgun on the merchant ship was meant for exactly this kind of enemy, one who respected no flag and answered to no authority. Based on these clues, we can see that in the 15th century, the South China Sea was not a quiet backwater waiting to be discovered. It was a busy, armed, and monsoon-driven trade corridor, anchored by three major choke points in the Philippines: the Pandaman, the Lena Shoal, and the Santa Cruz. And not just random shipwrecks, they were historical proof of a global trade network that was already thriving long before Magellan finally sailed into the Pacific. Okay, this is today's video, and thank you for watching. Take care, stay safe, and I will see you next time.